Progressives should unite at the next election to make sure the best placed progressive candidates are elected everywhere, who will then change the system to make it more democratic and more able to address these long-term challenges that we face.
The Labour leadership are really sceptical, they say, about electoral reform and proportional representation. But I wonder, what about the Labour Party more generally? What about the Liberal Democrats? Do you know what the appetite is amongst those members, amongst those MPs for this change?
Yeah, and I think there's a big divide here in terms of when you look at the Labour membership. I mean, over 80% of CLPs at last year's conference voted for change, and we're expecting to see even bigger push this year. The amazing groups like Labour for a New Democracy and Make Votes Matter have been making this argument for a very long time. And we know that the Lib Dems have always basically had PR in their manifesto, so they're not going to need to be won over. The question is whether the Labour leadership can understand that this is going to be effectively a great thing for progressives, because under PR systems you see more progressive governments elected. We know the first past the post tends to benefit Conservative parties and tends to be more undemocratic. So I think the last few years have really shown that there's a huge wave of support, not only amongst party members, but amongst the general public. And as you said, we look around the world and think, why are we in a system which, is effectively the UK and Belarus in Europe, and countries like the US, which, let's face it, have their own problems when it comes to division and democracy. So we want to move towards a system which opens up for people and allows more pluralism, and effectively can be a bit more about sort of cooperation structurally and culturally. And I think that's a really important thing. People want to see more cooperation amongst their politicians, and they know that it leads to better decisions and better, more democratic decisions in the long term.
And one of your, I guess, what's the word that I'm looking for? What you're planning to do is you are going to raise funds so that you can divert resources and also activists to supporting those candidates that have this progressive agenda and would want to make changes to the political system. Do you expect to receive criticism from people who are going to say you're manipulating the way that democracy works? And if so, what would your response be to that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And what we would say is, look, we want to change the way the system works. You've got to play the system to break the system, So this is a, ideally, if it works, this would be a one-time thing. We're saying currently the first past the post system means that tactical voting is absolutely inevitable. I mean, we saw in 2019 that the Brexit Party and the Tories had this sewn up. They talk about a stitch up. Well, that's the biggest stitch up, one of the biggest electoral stitches I've ever seen. The Brexit Party knew that if they stood in seats to split their aggressive vote, that they would stop the Tories getting the majority. So they were very focused in where they stood, and they understand that. So progressives constantly lose out from this system. I mean, there were 62 progressive, what we call tragedies at the last election, which is where the progressive vote was higher than the regressive vote, but the Tories still managed to win the seat. And what we're saying is, we think that every voter deserves to go to the polls and vote for a party they really feel represents them. And under a proportional system, they'd be able to do that. So we're absolutely with people who say this is not ideal. We want to, get a progressive government elected, and we want to see that shift to a proportional representative system, which would unlock all of these amazing changes that we hope would come about as a result of that.
Frances Foley, Director of Compass, the campaign group behind Win as One. We will keep an eye on that on this show, definitely, for you, and keep you up.